And there's Miles right there. Miles, great to see you. Hey, exactly, right back at you. You're not going to throw a sandwich at me, are you? I just want to make sure before we get
Oh,
going.
Jim, if I was there with you in person, of course I would throw a sandwich at you. But just to give you a bite to eat, man, I think you're looking too skinny.
I need to put on some. I did have a Shake Shack today. I was with my dad, took him to the doctor, and we dined on some Shake Shack afterwards. So, and that's not an advertisement. I don't do advertising here. But yeah, there was this guy last night who threw a sandwich at a federal officer, and Adam
Yeah.
Kinzinger, who was just on, said, "Don't throw a sandwich at the federal officer." I agree with that. But he has become somewhat of a hero, pun intended, here in Washington D.C. You know,
Well,
don't
Jim,
bread on me. Yeah.
I was just on with our friend Reed Galen, who was one of
Oh
the
yes.
co-founders over at Lincoln Project, and we were talking a little bit about this. We didn't talk about the sandwich thrower, and for listeners who are just joining us, of course, this was the guy who maybe he'd had a couple drinks. I don't know. I just kind of looked that way from the video, but he
Yeah.
threw a sandwich at one of the police checkpoints at one of the officers, and he's now being charged with a felony.
If you're eating
Um,
Subway at that time of night, you probably have had a couple of cold
yeah.
ones. I'm just going to say,
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
for sure. But what was really jarring about the whole thing, and I was talking to Reed about this, is the places they've set up these military and police checkpoints in Washington. I mean, these are areas where Washingtonians go socialize. I mean,
yeah,
people who come to Washington to serve, whether it's in a Barack Obama administration or a Donald Trump administration, this is where the young people go out. This is where they socialize. And it's evident to me that they're picking these places to create checkpoints to send a message. I mean,
yeah,
it doesn't seem like they're going into the most dangerous neighborhoods of Washington, D.C. They're going to the places where reporters, they're going to the places where, government civil servants go out and socialize to project a message of power. And
yeah,
it's very unusual to say this about the streets of the United States and Washington, D.C. And the last time I felt like the streets of D.C. were this eerie was the night of January 6th. After the
yes,
insurrection, if anyone was in Washington or you watched news coverage of it, it was the strangest night on the streets of our town because
I
there was a
remember.
curfew and there was just a cold wind blowing. I mean, it was cinematic, but in the worst way. It felt like an East European capital during the Cold
Yes,
War. And I think that installing National Guard troops in Washington creates that feeling again. But unlike the night of January 6th, the very brief uh, you know, uh, time where they put those curfew restrictions in place, this seems, Jim, to be something that is going to be quasi-permanent.
yeah. And I remember, the next day I was there out on the streets that night. I was at the White House that day, and I remember how they all scattered like cockroaches in the West Wing. You couldn't find anybody to talk to. But, that night it was extremely eerie. You're right. And then the next day, I will never forget this, not to go off on a tangent, but I remember seeing all of these people in MAGA hats outside of their hotels, smoking cigarettes, cooling their heels, waiting for their ride out of town and that sort of thing. And it struck me as just absolutely insane that these are probably people who were at the insurrection and
Yep.
weren't arrested. Remember, many of them were not arrested that day. They had to go
Yeah.
and find them after what they did. And for Pam Bondi today, going back to the sandwich guy, saying, if you touch any law enforcement officer, we will come after you. They beat the shit out of police officers on January 6th, and her
Yeah.
boss pardoned them. And I
Yeah.
know we get exhausted pointing out these hypocrisies, but it drives me bananas.
Yeah. And I don't think that we can point that out enough. And you
Yeah.
get this question all the time, Jim, when you're just engaging with folks when you're out and about in the country and they say, how do I communicate this, to my friends and family? How do I break through? And it's examples like that are really
Yeah.
important to give to them. I
Yeah.
get that there's a tendency to want to sit down over a hamburger and say, don't you see? He's doing things a dictator does. I get
Yeah.
that. But that's not likely to break through to someone who's skeptical of these claims of autocracy. The things that do break through are when you present them with these conundrums, when you
Yeah.
present them with hypocrisy, and especially
That's
if you
true.
present them with questions. Just like that example, Jim, is when you're sitting down with those folks and say, instead of saying, yeah, he's being a dictator, look at them and saying, I'm really frustrated. Why would Donald Trump pardon these people who abused cops, but then at the same
Right.
time, when it benefits him, say that they're going to prosecute people who attack cops? Why would they do that? You got to
Yeah.
give them those elements of hypocrisy so they themselves run the math and say, yeah, that doesn't add up. That's not right. And there's a whole hell of a lot of those so far in this second Trump administration.
Yeah, and then the issue, and I was just talking about this with Adam, the issue of calling in the National Guard willy-nilly because, Big Balls got assaulted
Yep.
late on a Saturday night or whatever it was, and he failed to get the National Guard. He didn't want to get the National Guard there on time in a timely fashion on January 6th. He got there until 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening after it was basically over. I mean, again, and I think you're absolutely right. Presenting that kind of information in that fashion, I think you're right. I think that's a very good point to make, Miles. And it frustrates me that people will just, they can just sort of look at what's happening in DC right now and say, well, that's DC. Sorry.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And,
Yeah.
I've got to say, in the immediate wake of January 6th, I was saying to a lot of folks that it was so evident to me that the president wanted the insurrection to happen and he wanted it to succeed. And it's tough to transport yourself back in time, but that's not actually what the popular conversation was like. I mean, we hadn't shifted to the conversation of Trump's complicity yet. Everyone was just in shock that this had happened. But it was so evident to me because I've been in these moments with the president where there's a national emergency and you can go deploy US forces. It doesn't take hours. It doesn't take hours. You can get to
He's
the
the
president very,
president.
very
Right.
quickly and say,
That's
Mr.
right.
President, here's all the different tools at your disposal to make this happen. And in
Yeah.
fact, what was shocking to me is it takes a lot of effort if you are the president
Yeah.
to avoid all of your lieutenants who want you to go do the right thing. And that's apparently what Donald Trump did on that day is he sat in a dining room adjacent to the Oval Office and basically locked the door and drank Diet Cokes and sat on his hands and refused to make those phone calls. And friends of mine who were in the White House who were trying to get to the president to say, we've got to do something, were
Right.
rebuffed. People like Matt Pottinger, who was the deputy national security advisor, were denied access to the president to make these things happen. People couldn't get a hold of him. He wanted this to happen. And then, like you just said, the moment that one of his Doge employees, gets punched in the face, boom, the next day, 2 days later, we've got military checkpoints all across Washington, D.C. That
Yeah.
is hypocrisy at a national scale.
No question about it. And speaking of times when you've been behind the scenes of witnessing up close and personal some of the lunacy that can go on inside his administration, you were writing about this, and I read this to folks earlier from your Substack earlier today, looking at the conditions at Alligator Alcatraz, what the
Yep.
detainees there are going through, and it reminds you a lot of what you saw personally, up close and personal, with Donald Trump as he was throwing out one of these crazy cockamamie ideas as to how to treat migrants in this country.
Jim, I hate to say it, you
Yeah.
and everyone who's an American listening to this need to realize you have a president that has a reptile fetish. And that sounds real weird.
Weird.
Maybe it sounds a little funny. And I mean every word of it. You have a president that has a reptile fetish. What do I mean by that? I found this out in the most bizarre way possible. And if you want to read the whole story, it's over on the Treason Substack. But,
Yeah.
the long and short of it is one day I was briefing the Secretary of Homeland Security on a pretty serious threat stream that we were dealing with. We had just finished the Secretary's daily intelligence brief, and we were going through some pretty alarming things. And the president called in to the Secretary and from the White House, and he basically had a request. He was really frustrated by the images he was seeing on Fox News of migrants crossing the border. And
Mm.
Fox really obnoxiously was always running this B-roll all the time,
Yeah.
of migrants crossing the border. And they knew it just shot his blood pressure through the roof. And he said to the Secretary of Homeland Security at the time, Kirsten, it was Kirsten Nielsen. He said, I want you to look into something for me. I want to know if we can dig a giant moat at the border and fill it with alligators and snakes. And Kirsten's listening to this, and I see her face contort, and she puts the thing on speakerphone as we're sitting there and brings me into
Yeah.
the conversation with the boss. And we basically ask him to rerun what he's just said. Yep, we heard it right. The president wants to know if we could dig a moat, and just keep in mind, the southern border is almost 2,000 miles long. President of the United
Yeah.
States wants to dig a moat because in his mind, that doubles the height of the border wall. If you dig it down as high as it is, it doubles the height. But then he wants to put two different types of reptiles in that moat, alligators and snakes, and not just for show. The president made clear in that conversation, it was evident that he wanted migrants to fear that they would fall into that moat and be attacked or eaten alive. It would be a real weird thing, Jim, if this was you over beers proposing to me that we put a
Right.
moat with reptiles in it. But this is the president of the United States in the middle of the morning fantasizing about a man-eating zoo stretching across the border. And here was the thing. I mean, Kirsten and I weren't laughing about this as the president was saying it because we knew it wasn't a joke coming from him. And incredibly, what we had to do to get him off of this insane idea was not appeal to Donald Trump's morality, not appeal to his
Yeah.
humanity, because that is not the type of thing that can dissuade him from doing something deeply immoral and likely illegal. It was to appeal to his penny pinching nature. He is a famously cheap man. And
Yeah.
we knew, one, that this was impractical and insane and all the things that anyone would know in hearing that proposal. But the only way to get Donald Trump to stop bringing it up was we had to go do back of the envelope McKinsey math to say, all right, how much would it actually cost to dig a gigantic moat and take care of alligators and snakes so they could gobble up innocent people if they fell in? Well, the answer, it turns out, is billions and billions and billions of dollars.
Right.
And we knew
Also,
that
where are
when
you
we
supposed to
took
find
that-
all these alligators and
Where do you
snakes?
get them? Who takes care of them? What agency is
know.
responsible? Do we put Border Patrol in charge of taking care of alligators? And we ended up taking him the billions number, and he said, oh my God, that's too expensive, and he shot down the idea. Now, it came up several other times, and as I later found out, he raised it in front of other people. But here's why it's so worrying, Jim, is stories like that after the first term of Donald Trump were sort of quaint, bizarre anecdotes of this man. To me, they were something much different. They were a preview of what you were going to get as America if you got a Donald Trump second term. You wouldn't have people trying to persuade him not to do those insane things. You would have people trying to find a way to make them reality. And that is what has happened in the second Trump administration. No, he has not yet built a moat with alligators and snakes, but he's been so fetishizing reptiles to attack migrants that he did bring to fruition a Florida prison camp in the Everglades surrounded by alligators that it's called Alligator Alcatraz. And unsurprisingly, we have a report this week from the Wall Street Journal that place is a nightmare. Migrants
Yes.
are living in squalor. They're being denied the opportunity to brush their teeth. They're being denied the opportunity to bathe. There are reports that women who are menstruating are not being given hygiene products and are forced to sit in their blood while they are in detention. This is sick. This is un-American. And unfortunately, it was very, very foreseeable. And there's about 1 million more of those stories of a Donald Trump who wanted to do crazy things in a term one and has maybe not yet had the time to implement them. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox, Jim, but that's the reason I wanted to bring it up today is we are seeing these things, these bizarre fantasies the president had come to life. And there were few that he had more frequently than cruel ways to punish migrants.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm tempted to compare him to Dr. Evil with sharks with lasers attached to their heads, and he ends up with ill-tempered sea bass. But I'll put that to the side. He is his most cruel when it comes to the issue of immigration.
Yeah.
And it is not surprising to me that he would fantasize about the mauling of human beings.
Yeah.
And especially migrant human beings. And that, I think, should give everybody a great deal of pause. And it also shows, I was talking about this the other day, I think it was with Olivia Miles, about Trump asking whether they could shoot the protesters after George Floyd. Remember, Mark Esper, the defense secretary, said that had happened. And this is somebody who has sociopathic ideas, it seems to me, when he repeatedly brings up ideas that involve the torture of human beings. and he's the president of the United States. And it makes me wonder, based on your experience, Miles, what is it? Because there are people who say he's crazy, he's nuts, he's lost his damn mind, he's old, and he just says crazy stuff because of that. Or is it something more sinister in that there's a sociopathy here? There's something seriously wrong with him, and it warrants our attention.
Just as you're saying that, Jim, I'm trying
Yeah.
to think of all the different ways I heard the president or his lieutenants describe punishing migrants. And
Yeah.
off the top of my head, I heard plans to slice them, zap them, gas them, and shoot them.
And they
And
wanted to
leaving
paint the wall black, right? So they would burn their hands. I remember
burn them.
that one.
Let's add burn them in. And so
Yeah.
putting aside the alligators and snakes and moats, what I mean by slice them is, the president wanted the wall. He probably told us a dozen times. He wanted the wall to be black. He wanted it to be black because in the hot sun, it would burn the hands of migrants if they touched it. And I remember we
Yeah.
were on an Air Force One flight and we were summoned to his cabin because he wanted to talk specifically about the way he wanted the spikes to be shaped, because he wanted to be certain that it would impale someone who tried to climb over the wall. So,
Yeah.
think for a second. Again, you're in the president's cabin on Air Force One and you're listening to a man describe the possibility of an impaled human body on that wall. And it needs to be bloody and it needs to be gruesome because the other migrants need to look up and they need to see that person dangling by their hand that's gone through that sharp spike. That's the slicing. The zapping there was a conversation inside the Trump administration about using this new technology that had been developed at the time that sends, I think it's short burst microwaves towards crowds to create crowd dispersal, but it creates the effect of making your skin feel like it's been lit on fire. And there was a conversation about whether these
Right.
devices could be purchased and given to Border Patrol to make these people, and keep in mind, it's like a lot of women and children coming across the border. Okay. Imagine the United States of America making little children feel like their bodies have been lit on fire because the president so badly wants them to turn back the other direction. That's the zapping. The gassing, when there was a point at which there was a run on a CBP station at the southwest border, and I remember they had to use tear gas for crowd control. And the
Yeah.
president saw this on Fox News, and he thought it was a conscious decision of the Secretary of Homeland Security to just start gassing migrants at the border. And I think we were on the way to Tucker Carlson's studio when we got that phone call. And the president
Wow.
says to the secretary, "This is fantastic. It's amazing what you're doing at the border with the gassing of the migrants." And we were sort of confused what he was talking about, because that's not a decision the secretary makes if there's a threat at a
Yeah.
location to disperse the crowd. But the president's impression was there was this plan to start gassing them at the border, and he loved that, and he wanted to see more of that. And then, of course, the last thing I mentioned is shooting migrants. Is I was there for the conversations when the president said, "Okay, well, if you can't," he was told, "Mr. President, we don't have the right to engage migrants who are unarmed by shooting them. That's illegal." And he said, "Well, shoot them in the legs." Shoot them
Yeah.
in the legs. Again, we're talking about a lot of women and children that are crossing that border. So look,
Right.
that's just a quick survey of his thoughts is, slicing, burning, zapping, gassing, and shooting migrants at the border. And that's just what I heard, Jim.
Yeah. To tie it back to what's happening in Washington, D.C. right now, I mean, I don't know if he really sees the people of Washington, D.C. as fully human. And I sense that he's looking for a spark. He's looking for a provocation so he can unleash holy hell on the people who live in Washington, D.C., or at the very least, the protesters who may come out and protest what's going on here. And I do think that it is very alarming what he's capable of, and it needs to be called out. And so I'm glad you wrote this piece, but it needs to be called out. And I'm just wondering what it's going to take for the Republicans to finally listen to their souls in all of
Well,
this.
look, he is a cruel and dangerous man, Jim. And,
Yeah.
just those anecdotes that I provided, of course, on multiple occasions, Trump's lieutenants have said, that's bullshit. That's not real. Those things haven't happened. Well, guess what? I've got the receipts, and I put a lot of the receipts out there. And I'd be delighted
Yeah.
one day in a deposition to name all of the people in Trump's orbit who also were present for these types of conversations. And I'm
Mm.
sure at some point I'll have that. opportunity. And I'd welcome them lying under oath about the types of things the man has said. But you don't even need to tell those stories from behind the scenes, because Donald Trump says those things himself, right? The
Yeah.
shooting of the migrants is the thing that he went from talking about in private to talking about in public. And so he implicates himself, even when his own advisors want to defend them. To your question
Yeah.
about how do we wake people up and how do they grow
Yeah.
a conscience while they're watching this? I hate to say it, but really sadly, these anecdotes that we just talked about with migrants clearly haven't shocked the conscience of a lot of these people in my former party, in the Republican Party. I would hope
Yeah.
that these types of things happening to Americans might wake them up as well. And as Donald Trump is deploying American forces on U.S. city streets, making U.S. city streets the front line in a new, effective war on the home front, that would be alarming enough to them. And yet, if it's in a Democratic blue city like Washington, D.C., they seem very willing to turn their heads the other direction. And
Yeah.
I don't want to know what that breaking point looks like, because I fear it's a very ugly scenario. And we can go
Yeah.
back to where we started part of the conversation, which is January 6th. You and I both felt
Yeah.
like after January 6th, how could Republicans possibly continue to stand by this man? It was
Yeah.
so shocking. It was so galling. It was an attack on the seat of American government. And the barbarians were right there at the gates, right? They almost stormed the House floor where they could have put members of Congress in mortal danger. They were that close. And
Yeah.
I think we all thought, well, I mean, there's nothing more powerful than this to wake up the party to the danger of this man. And yet,
Yeah.
within days, many of them had convinced themselves that Donald Trump wasn't responsible for this, and they were right back in his camp. And so I worry it takes something more visceral than a January
Yeah.
6th to be able to have that effect. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that's something that our republic can handle.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and the piece that you wrote is an excellent piece that ties into all of this. Really appreciate it. Miles, as always, great to talk to you. Let's keep doing these conversations. I think they're making a huge difference. And I mean, part of the thing that I do with my Substack is I bring my experiences, the stuff that I witnessed, and it helps, I think, tell the story of what's happening to all of us now. And you had these experiences too, and I think it's so healthy and it's so productive that you're sharing your depth of knowledge, your wealth of knowledge with everybody. So thank you. I appreciate it, man.
Well, let me leave you with one thing, Jim, which
Yeah,
is to say
please.
this to folks is, and you've heard me say this before, but it's easy to feel like as one person, you can't have an impact on this stuff. But I'm telling you, as someone who was on the receiving end of the anger and the angst across this country during the first Trump administration, I am telling you, it worked. When there were policies like family separation that should
Yeah.
never have been put into place, that got put into place, the outcry from across the country rocked Trump's lieutenants. It rocked Trump himself. They were scared shitless, not
His own
necessarily
family.
because of
Yeah.
not because of Jim Acosta, although they were scared of Jim Acosta. They were scared of you. They were scared of
Yeah.
the listener. They were so scared that you guys were crowdsourcing your anger with this administration. Doing that in this second term will work. Make sure they hear your voice. And Jim, thank you as always for continuing to shine a light, my friend. I appreciate you.
Man, you right back at you, and you keep doing what you're doing because it is invaluable. And I think you're absolutely right. We have to keep the pressure on. We have to keep spotlighting this stuff and not let it, crawl under a rock, like Stephen Miller probably does every night. But anyway, Miles, as always, my man, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jim.
Good to see you. Miles Taylor, I mean, please check out his Substack, subscribe. He just does phenomenal work there. And I do want to say that I think one of the reasons why Trump is doing what he's doing right now in Washington, D.C. is because what he did in L.A. failed. He tried to invade the second largest city in America, send in the Marines, send in federal agents, try to instigate people there in Los Angeles, and the people of LA did not take the bait. They did not take the bait, and it did not blow up into the inferno that Trump wanted, so he could crack skulls. And I think they saw the polling information, to Miles's point about immigration. They saw the polling information inside the White House, and we've all seen the polling information as to how deeply unpopular his immigration policy is now. The way he treats children with cancer, deporting them out of the country, sweeping people up in restaurants and in Home Depot parking lots. They said they were going after the criminals. They said they were going after the gangbangers. It was a lie. They lied. They absolutely lied, and they continue to lie to this day. And now the public sees right through it. They understand all too well what is going on with the immigration raids that are taking place in this country. They know all too well what is taking place in some of these detention facilities, as Miles was talking about, at Alligator Alcatraz, and now DeSantis, because he wants to get back into the good graces of Donald Trump and MAGA. He's going to continue to build these facilities in Florida. There's a report out today he's going to do another one in North Florida. But it is deeply unpopular with the American people. The American people do not want a policy of cruelty toward migrants in this country. And so what does Donald Trump do? He sends the National Guard into Washington. He wants to say, okay, maybe this is the kind of distraction. Maybe this is the kind of brutality that the American people will adopt and make it their own. And as I've written before, Donald Trump wants his cruelty to become your cruelty. Donald Trump wants his inhumanity to become your inhumanity. Donald Trump wants his brutality to become your brutality. And you have to reject it. It is your duty, in my view, as a good American, to reject it, because it is not who we are. And I was earlier today, I kind of raced in here to do today's show. I was taking my dad to get surgery on his eye. He's getting cataracts taken care of. And we showed up for his appointment. He accidentally ate some food this morning. They said, hey, we can't do the surgery right now. Come back in a few hours. My dad, because of his eye issues, had not seen the movie Superman. So we went to go see the movie Superman. This is all happening earlier this morning over in Northern Virginia. And he hadn't seen the new Superman yet. And I just keep thinking about this scene that's in the movie. And again, I know I'm a grown man. I shouldn't be talking about comic books, where Superman, who is played brilliantly by this new young actor who plays him, talks about good in the world, protecting good in the world, saving good in the world. And Lois Lane, I'm not saying this verbatim, but Lois Lane at one point says that's not how the world works. You see everything as good versus evil. You see people and you think they're beautiful. And Superman says, well, maybe that's the new punk rock. Meaning, maybe that's what's cool now. And the disconnect between that sentiment and the reality that we all face today is pretty staggering. I will grant you that. But in my view, the way we get out of this, the light at the end of the tunnel, is to keep embracing good, is to stay on the side of good. Maybe you shouldn't throw a sandwich at a police officer. That might be stretching things a little bit. Don't bread on me. Assault with a deadly weapon. I'm going to use those lines one more time. Not the hero we ordered, but the hero we got. But anyway, but I do think there's something to that concept. And as simple as it sounds, and as Pollyannish as it sounds, and as comic book Hollywood as it sounds, it's what I'm going to hold on to. As Donald Trump is trying to come up with all of these different ways to divide us, he's trying to come up with all of these ways to make his cruelty our cruelty. As many ways as he tries to make his inhumanity our inhumanity. The way out of this is to hold on to what is good. And that doesn't mean we're all perfect. Me, far from it. No question about it. I'm last in line in that regard. But it's something to keep striving for. And I will tell you, having been up close with Donald Trump, and I think Miles will agree with this, having been up close with Donald Trump, and Adam, who's also been up close with Donald Trump. He hates goodness. He hates good. The idea of good versus evil. Brutalizing and inflicting cruelty upon migrants is evil. All of the ways that Miles talked about, that Donald Trump has talked about brutalizing immigrants is evil. We are in a fight between good versus evil. And I say the way out of this is to remain on the side of good, as frustrated as we get, as exhausting as it is, as much as he tries to distract us from Jeffrey Epstein. And it's maddening at times. There's no question about it. But the way that we all keep our head on our shoulders, keep our sanity, and not descend into that dark world that he inhabits is to stay on the side of good. Truth, justice, and the American way, all that too. My thanks to Adam Kinzinger and Miles Taylor, and to all of you for watching. Really appreciate it. Thanks for hanging in there, everybody, as always. And consider subscribing and even becoming a paid subscriber if you want to support the work here. But appreciate all your time this afternoon. Thanks for tuning in. Still reporting from Washington. I'm Jim Acosta. Have a good evening.